Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming today. Today's topic is on invisible banking, and I think a lot of it stems from how customer expectations have changed over the years, right? I remember when I was a kid, every month I would sit in the branch with my mom to pay the bills, and when Maybank first launched their mobile banking, I was like, wow, this is amazing. But these days, the expectation has shifted so much, right? When I'm trying to pay someone and it's delayed by 5 minutes, I'm like, this is terrible. The world has really changed, and I think that kind of mindset also have to shift, that banks can no longer just be digital, right? Banks need to go beyond that. They need to be part of the customer's life, and they need to be at every important point of their life journey to provide the services that they do need. Which is why today we're glad to work with folks from GFT, AWS, and also Thought Machine to host this very discussion as well. Before we begin the discussion, maybe we can have Antonio to set the scene, give us a little presentation, and give us a sense of what it means to be invisible banking. Go ahead, Antonio, you have the floor.
So I'm really delighted to be here and being able to talk to you about, in general, I call it, invisible bank beyond client expectations. I think we understand what does it mean. Yeah, I read this very often. We are at the end of transformation. I think we have the wrong perception that we are at the end of the transformation. Actually, we are just probably at the beginning. But the reality is, the true digital transformation starts with a thought. You need to think and act as a tech company. Mercedes, great cars, reliable, fast, secure. So everything you want in a car, you find it in a Mercedes-Benz. But in the early 2000s, there was another car that came out. And, this car was able to change the user experience in weeks. Everything the client wanted to see, they can make it very, very fast. Mercedes needed months because everything was analog, and there were, the controls, and everything was really very good tech, but old tech. So Mercedes-Benz, despite all the qualities and the service and everything you want to get in a car, didn't fulfill this customer experience. So the people wanted more. So what they did is they start working on transformation. And today, most of the Mercedes look like this. So all the analog, all the previous tech that was meant to provide that user experience was completely changed. Took them years, but today you have basically a complete experience that you can actually customize. I want to see this, I want to see that, I want this in miles, I want this in kilometers. You can do anything. What has fundamentally changed is really the way you approach. So you don't start transformation by just using the new tech in such a way to be with everybody, like everybody else. You profoundly change the way you do things. And that one is, and you all agree, every new bank today start thinking client first. You need to become much more creative, saying, where do I actually can make more money? You are a business, you have to make money, isn't there? And there's nothing wrong with this, but we have to create new business models. So you see, you have one of the pioneers. This is how a Tesla looks like. I have the Mercedes. Yeah. And actually, that's the same thing you should have in your own business. There will be companies that are very small, very flexible, coming with all these bells and whistles, yeah? But they don't have the depth and the expertise you have. So to truly be part of those frontline new services, new business models, and we'll talk more about later, hyper-personalization, AI, new products, you have an advantage adopting and thinking like a tech company with the expertise you have in the banking business to actually create something like this. And the last point I want to make is all bankers, when I was very young, everybody taught me about KYC. Everybody knows what KYC is. But today we really need to think about UYC, understand your client, because that's what's going to define how you want to tackle your transformation.
So I guess in the room today, we do have some Mercedes-Benz present and some Teslas present, and also some Mercedes-Benz trying to spin off some Teslas here and there. So it's going to be an interesting conversation.
I think maybe start with saying the Mercedes and the Tesla is not for everyone, right? So a couple of points. We take a look at the Tesla, right? It looks very clean, very user-centric, right? The interface is amazing, right? Very easy to use. And on the other hand, after Mercedes went through that round of transformations, multiple different rounds of transformation as well, we could see the front end more appealing, definitely, right, to a lot of users. The question is whether behind the dashboard, right, whether the wires are jumbled up all together, right? I think this is a advantage that neobanks, digibanks like ourselves, right, our YTL, GXBank have, because we really started from like blank slate, right? And what I really meant by that and wanted to share here is more of really then understanding who wants to drive a Tesla, who wants to drive a Mercedes, right? So understanding our user pain points is very important. Understanding the right segment and the persona that we are targeting is super important, right? Otherwise, people who really just prefers a regular Japanese Honda, right, or Toyota, then you are essentially selling to the wrong group of people. Firstly, we talk about accessibility, affordability. It's not a range that they're looking at for sure, right? And secondly, if we talk about Tesla, does it suit to, say, my parents, right? I doubt my dad would want to drive a Tesla, right? And even see, we talk about electric cars. Sorry, I'm going deeper into into cars, right? But just drawing the comparison, right? So if we were to sell a Tesla to my dad, right? He will not know how to function it, right? So then the similar comparison would be whatever functional app that we have that's very fancy today, as we layer it and serve this to a user that is from more urban areas, right? That's so used to going to branches where people serve them, whether these will serve their needs. Right, so I think at GXBank, that's the advantage that we had. We spend a lot of time doing a lot of research, user interviews, right, qualitative, quantitative, to understand the pain points. And I think this is a very iterative process, because truth be told, as an economy, as a social group as well, everybody upgrades and improves over time, right? So I think as a bank, we need to do that together with our customers.
Yeah, so I mean, the modernizing part, it's not very different. I mean, we all aspire to be, sorry YTL, you're coming on board very soon, but we all aspire to be how GXBank, right? I mean, 4 minutes you open an account, right? As simple as that. That's what modernizing is all about. I mean, we should all aspire. You know, there's one question about, you know, how incumbent, challenger, neobank, whatever. But this is what it is, right? I mean, the world is changing. The world is going to be like that. It's going to be your app, your contact center. Cannot get app, call contact center. That's how it's going to be like. I mean, that's what future banking is all about. But now, a lot of data surprises us. Like, you know, I spoke earlier, you know, maybe with you, Vincent, about how we have 2,700 agent banks. These are people that, you know, the moms and pops, that literally are our agent to do simple withdrawals and deposits, pay bills, etc., etc. Now, these guys are there, and we thought every year, you know, when we have our strategy meeting, how do we scale them back? I mean, come on, they're cannibalizing our own business, right? People are still going to an intermediary to pay bills. You won't believe this, but we have data to show you. And not in any 1 year, today is 2024, that the number and data has come down, right? So there's no compelling reasons really for us to scale off these agent banks. So this is one way of us approaching these guys. Now, we also realize it is very painful. I mean, it doesn't help that I come from a finance background. Everything is about capex, opex, everything is cost to income ratio, etc., etc. So the key word here, I think, is about partnership and collaboration. The day will come where banks cannot think about just just taking all the profits to yourself. Let's share the love, right? And also, more importantly, the pain.
We talk about Teslas, we talk about Mercedes, and then we were talking about the basic banking service framework that Bank Negara issued. And Bank Negara said, maybe you guys should start selling some MyVs, So I think different needs for different segments.
I just thought it was a very interesting point how you were talking about how, serving the underserved and then you're going through agent banking. But I think that itself is what some of the banks are trying to go into partnership, like what invisible banking is about, right? It doesn't matter who is serving that product. At the end of the day, it's, backed by a bank, but you want to actually increase your reach, right, in that sense. And in fact, I think invisible banking is something that we are so used to now, even like we can pay with any wearable right now. In fact, other banks are trying to find partners to work with and then try to offer this invisible banking solution, right? I think the other part about data is interesting is, banks we are sitting on a lot of data, and that really helps us in, giving hyper-personalization, so to speak, to customers. I think the challenge really in data is the cleanliness of it, right? Because I think it's so difficult to categorize our even, for example, transaction data to be meaningful enough for a customer. So I think in that sense that while we have the data, the challenge that generally is a lot of effort needs to be put into really like cleaning or recategorizing some of this data before it can actually be utilized and actually provide a ultimate solution to the customers here.
Conversations like this always, I don't know, they just inspire me. I was just thinking back about invisible banking, right? I guess for me, it's really about what do you do beyond payments, and what do you offer that someone won't pick up from someone else when they do it for free or cheaper than you, right? Ultimately, I think being able to deliver an invisible banking service needs to improve someone's life in some way. I think Grab was a great thing, and I think to be entrenched enough to be able to improve people's lives that way, it really takes a lot of dedication beyond just the tech, right? And delivering some kind of value add that is significant. And really pondering as we had the discussions today, I think the closest thing we've done in boring incumbent banking maybe has been more of security and fraud awareness and management, right? Nowadays, because of all the work that Bank Negara is pushing us towards, transactions are becoming more secure, right? Largely because of a collective effort across banks, regulatory, and all participants involved. But for me, I guess that has been maybe the most recent evolution of invisible banking in terms of value proposition that people get without realizing, right?
I mean, I recall when I made one large transaction, it asked me like, what was your favorite restaurant? And I'm like, dude, I opened this account 10 years ago. Like, my favorite restaurant 10 years ago is very different than now, right? So there's a lot of this kind of opportunities there as well. Melvin, sorry, you want to go ahead as well?
So, I think if you look across the world, all the digital bank, mostly, not all, typically they are actually taking the segment of customers who are already banked, who are just not so happy with whatever services that they have, or maybe they don't get more than that. Classic case, 4 minutes. I think we could do better. We'll show you the statistics, at least mine. So it has to be better. Otherwise, what's the point? And the fact that any type of utility type of transactions, we have to do better. If not, then we shouldn't be sitting on the table. We should be sent off somewhere else. So I think that's important, and typically those are where the strength of digital bank is, and they will do more and more on that front. And to be fair, a customer doesn't want to see a RM just because he make a huge transactions, and the huge transactions defined 10 years ago and now is very different. So that's the fluid part, and how as a digital bank can we capture on that, latch on it, do better, make it more seamless, more accessible, and also hyper customize it to the way they want it. I think that's what really set us apart.
Fats, you wanted to add something as well?
Okay. So as a digital bank at GX, so I'd like to offer a different, a flip side perspective. So one of the risks that we have, that we are always scared of, is being too invisible. So incumbents actually have the advantage that we don't have, right? Where you are everywhere. People see you, but not us, right? So that's why you see us very heavy on social media, just to make ourselves visible, right? And part of our strategy also is ensuring there is always a human touch somewhere, right? Whether it's through CE or through UX, as what KY also explaining. And yeah, another thing to think about as well is the use cases, right? So one of the things that we are also keep on thinking, how do we want to encourage user to not forget about us, right? What are the use case? So increasing daily uses. So example, you have seen our integration with the Grab app, right? So we know Grab is a daily use kind of services, right? So either food, transport, and so forth. So then we did the integration with payments. Of course, there are more strategies we'll have akan datang. No, I cannot disclose yet. But of course, that's the key strategy. So we want to change bank just a mere utility, right? So I mean, people just usually bank right now. By end of the month, I pay my bill, I transfer money to my wife, my friends, and my kids, right? And then they forget about it, right? But I mean, incumbents still have the advantage where I said earlier, right? You guys are everywhere. So for us, we are trying to change that, increase more usage, and I think Antonio is also aware, whereby 90% of digital banks in the world fail because of that missing use cases, because they ended up became too invisible, and people don't use them, right?
The profit margin also becomes invisible then.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Sorry, Anthony, yes, go ahead.
If there's one company that is not invisible in Southeast Asia, is Grab. So I will not fall for your little, we are invisible. No. Honestly, you don't need to do anything. Yeah, the only thing you need to tell people is that actually you have a bank. Yeah, and you can compete with everybody. But the invisibility, I don't fall for your thing. Yeah,
It's a nice spiel though. But I think we don't necessarily have to equate the invisible aspect of the service as being forgettable, right? And sometimes being invisible makes you easier to remember, because I think CIMB, you guys did have this function where you will collate the spending, and then at the end of the tax cycle, you get to just automatically include it in the tax claim. Yeah, right. So I mean, that part feels invisible, but also as a customer, I remember it because it made my life a lot easier. I also kind of want to hear from Zeking as well, because it's the only UI UX guy. Do you have any perspective to add on this topic of personalization, invisible banking?
I'm going to bring in Toyota. I was going to link invisibility to trustworthiness of the maintainability or the longevity of Toyotas. So you buy a Toyota because you know you'll last long. It will serve you well, whether it is for commercial use, whether it's for personal use. So the whole point of a banking service, whether it is invisible or not, is to be there for the user. They know at the back of the mind that it is this bread and it can get the job done for me. And that's it. It doesn't need to purposely recall, but it is always there. So with that, then people will continue to ask for that from that particular brand. And that's what we try to do in Maybank as well. When we are across everywhere, and from UX UI side, how do I then help enable the different business function to very much target the user group? Because the agility and the agility to react to customer need is something that is constantly we are trying to improve, and we are constantly improving. And one of the areas that we have to look at is everyone is of different maturity. So then what we try to do is have them, empower them more in that area to have the right process of
having that cycle of consistent validation, users, and try to have that unique proposition at the same time scaling of added value to that specific customer group so that they continue to buy that back.
Moving on to the next team, and I think we know, this past year, one of the main topics is the rise of the digital banks, right? And a lot of incumbents have also rolled out their own version and about to roll out their own version. So I just want to get a sense from the incumbents as well, what are you guys doing? Is there any impact in terms of how you approach things? Like you see what Fadz is doing, you're like, okay, maybe I want to do this. So maybe we can start with Paili, since I think a lot of the digital banks also eventually want to attack the SMEs, which you guys are very strong at.
Yeah, so for us, right, we think we will coexist. At the size of our bank, it doesn't really make sense for us to move into a digital play. That's point one. So to be honest, as for a consumer, I'm not going to chase you guys. I'm not going to chase after the digital banks. I will, however, provide a similar, if not a Toyota version of what you can do with it. That's probably it. Because the core of our business really still requires the high touch. Our core business is still very much led by our SME business and the business owners. That's where you make the money. Now that money, whether we plow it back into capabilities like what we've done with our virtual credit card, and we're still the first bank that's done that. Now the way I use digital banks at board presentations, number one, I'm actually glad you guys are around. We use you guys as a benchmark peer for the things we want to do. Look at this bank, look at that bank, look at this bank. This is what they're doing, therefore we should do so. Yeah. So it's very selective because we know we probably cannot compete with what you guys have. And you guys starting on a new play. There's no legacy system to be bounded by. We are different. We're an old dinosaur. We're trying to crawl into the new world, right? So it's going to be this sort of very amphibian approach that we take. But always about how much money we have, how much money we can put in. Yeah, like you guys know, we don't go out for fundraising. So that is the difference. But I also want to point out that if you take a look at Singapore, and you look at the more of a regress that's happening because of the scam and fraud, you will find that this idea of locking your money, going back to branches, seeing people handle it, it's going to make a comeback. And so it depends on what sort of segments we're in. I'm not playing with Gen Z, we're playing with middle mature up to elderly. So it's a different sort of proposition that we would have. And that's why I think if we don't go head on with you guys, we can probably coexist.
Farilla, anything to add, since you guys also did your own digital banking spin-off? I don't know if it's accurate to say it's in response because you launched it before this bank came out, right? You want to talk a little bit about that approach?
So when I came into Bank Islam, it was as Chief Strategy Officer, and transformation was top of the agenda. And quite soon, as we embark on the transformation, there are two problem statements that we found, right? One is we need to digitalize the bank. And second is that even if we complete digitalization, it would not be able to be relevant. It's not future-proof because the innovation aspect and the new ways of working, that's the one that it's difficult to be catalyzed in just a purely digitalization project. And so we took up a two-speed digitalization approach where when we went into the cloud, it was just not a technology change. It was also not just about having a new digital channel. It was really about new ways of working. It was about new customer segment. It was about new digital products. And the journey up until now has been so enriching. And since then, I've taken up the role of the Chief Digital Officer, and I see both. I see the run the bank, and I see the change the bank, and I see the new metrics that we are able to monitor, to track. It's a new capability when you can track a new metrics that it's very difficult for you to get from your legacy outfit, right? That's a new capability, and I think the journey has been that It's not. I was asked just now. So, are you going to converge the two cores? So, we are one of the first that had these two cores. One is Mambu, one is Silver Lake. No, not necessarily. How are we differentiating ourselves, right? And there are today, and it could actually change in 2 years, in 3 years. And as I took on the role of Chief Digital Officer, it's really about building the infrastructure and culture that allows the bank to be agile. Because it could be cloud today, but it could be something else tomorrow. It could be a customer liking this today. What is it? It'll be different tomorrow. So, what is your vision for this digital channel in 5 years' time? And I do think that that's the wrong question, because nobody can predict actually to that level of granularity in 5 years' time. But what have we built and what culture have we embedded that will allow us to respond in an agile manner? Yeah.
5 years is a long time. I don't even know what I'm having for lunch tomorrow. But I think I want to jump to Nalin, but before, because you said you had a comment about dual core, but before we jump to Nalin on that comment, I have a little cheeky question for you. I think, when we look at a lot of banks who have this speedboat approach across the world, right, in US, in Europe, they spin off their own bank, they buy certain banks. The failure rate is unfortunately very, very high. And I think it's also challenging because for Bank Islam, it's a division, right? So you don't necessarily put the full force of your entirety of your budget onto it. And then for GXBank, it's an entire business. So they may have a lot more funding, a lot more resources poured into it, right? So when you approach building out this spin-off, how do you, I'm sure you've looked at all these examples, so how do you avoid falling into that same issue that some of these banks have fallen into?
That's I also mentioned earlier before we started, right? There are 3 objectives or 3 things that we measure the digital bank CDX. Essentially, number 1 is from a financial numbers, and that is to show that this is it is fit. There's product fit to this. There's segment fit to it. So of course we need to track the financial numbers. Second is unlocking those new capabilities. Are we learning fast? Are we unlocking new metrics? Are we unlocking new insights? And are we able to respond to that? So that's number 2. Number 3 is then how do we take these learnings and proven practices to the bank? So it's never really separated from the bank, but of course it has its own challenges. But ultimately, it's also about strengthening and enhancing Bank Islam proposition as a whole. So it's not a team that goes out and goes out into the sunset, right? And never looks back. It is it's interrelated in a way, and so that's how buy-in and that's how investment gets obtained.
Thanks for that. And Nalin, I think Farilla spoke a little bit about the 2 core approach, right? So I mean, you've worked with incumbent banks, you've worked with digital banks. How do they differ in terms of the tech stacks? How do they approach modernization? How do the 2 breeds of banks differ from each other in terms of their approach?
So to answer your question, Vincent, we've seen this being adopted by banks, and some of them are large ones like JP Morgan and Lloyds, which are in public domain. They are going into a complete digital transformation program for over 5 to 7 years, and they're taking product by product approach. They're taking a progressive migration approach. And on the other side, we have digital banks which essentially start with an MVP, and their focus is I build the ecosystem around the MVP, so that then the next product and then the next product and then the next product is something I can launch in a course of speed, in 2 months time, in 3 months time. So if you remember the slide that Antonio was showing about MOX, in 3 years time they build functionalities which many banks have not even achieved over 30 years, is simply because they have a platform where once they create the ecosystem, the next product becomes easier, and then the next product becomes even more easier because you're just rolling it out, and the framework doesn't restrict you.
Just listening through the whole round and really absorbing what everybody's saying, from technology to challenges, through innovation, through how things would work. So there's just one thought of it.
that I'm seeing. Another part is that, just to share a bit, I mean, I did not answer your question, what is human-centered design and why do we have it in CIMB? Really is based on, I think, and Tony, is it, that you mentioned about product pushing into journey transformation. But there's another part that we're trying to explore a lot more, is curiosity. So my team exists solely to help business to find better questions to ask and to test out those questions with as many users as we can and get as many insights as we can, and then triangulate our decisions in what's next to come, right? And I think that's the part that I feel we might not have touched on, which is the building the curiosity to, like, what if we were to really take an adjacent mining business and see what they're doing there and take that and apply it into the banking industry.
One of our very early customers, SEBX in Sweden, they launched an app which was called Unko, UNQUO, for solopreneurs. So you have a lot of these businessmen, solo entrepreneurs running their business, and they actually borrowed the concept from Tinder of swiping left and swiping right, basically to say, okay, this is going to be my personal expense, this is going to be my business expense. But the underlying account was created on Vault, Thought Machine Vault. But I'm just saying what you said is absolutely right, because a lot of things that you can learn from other industries and you bring into banking, and then those experiences will give you an idea of how innovation can be brought in. And it's all about stickiness, right? I think every bank is vying for customers to be with them, and avoid a deposit customer going and taking a home loan from another bank. I think that's one of the main goals every bank is trying to, and that's one thing possible through innovation.
I just never imagined that you'd be taking inspiration from the dating industry, but that's really interesting. KY, you wanted to add one last one?
I think as I look through what we have in the agenda today to be discussed across the banks as well, right? I think there's one area that talks about how to have key differentiating factor, how to build a killer product, right? And while I thought through this, comparing conventional banks, digital banks, or really just a technology company, right? I think it's not so much really about the products, to be very honest. I think it's really the people and the culture, right? So the keyword that you touched upon earlier and you used earlier, experimentation, right? I think in many different banks, as you go through your governance processes to present these to your management team, to your board and so on, right? I think many times, of course, we have a lot of different risk committees, compliance committees and whatnot. They are in place to ensure that we keep and hold and continue saving and investing our customers' money in a very secure manner, right? That's given. But with that in mind, that is where I think we are less daring, less brave to really go out there to try. Right, and a lot of different products out there, even the other digital banks, right? Tonic, right? Kakao, New Bank. I think it's embedded within the people and the culture, right? Whereby it's a lot of test and learn process. So whatever that we mentioned earlier in terms of user journey, persona identification, speaking to customer, you won't get it right. You won't get it right the first time. So it's a lot about iterating this process until you get it right. So that's the experimentation culture that needs to be in place for us to succeed together.
Any more last thoughts? I think we have time for one last one before we go for dinner. Yes, right.
So maybe just circling back as well, when people weighed in on what does the entrance of digital banks mean for incumbent banks and all that, right? In short, I think it keeps us on our toes in a very healthy way, right? We rethink everything around what we do with tech and also how we do our investments, down to how we are actually quite replaceable if we don't innovate and find the right propositions, right? It makes us very self-aware as to what our strengths are and makes us soul search a little bit in terms of what are our next steps in changes, because we are not going to go down the same path, right, as everyone else. But I think most importantly, it reminds us that we have to work together with more people, and which is why I think conversations like today are great, because the new propositions are kind of, you do one bit, I do the other, and together we are great. I think as Melvin aptly pointed out quite a bit earlier, if you're not going to improve it, why try, right? So I thought that was a really good quote.
That's a wonderful note for us to end on. I really enjoyed the conversation. And with that, thank you folks for joining us, and really appreciate everyone spending their time today.
Yeah.